r/NoSleep. Posted by u/storm, chaser, black. A hurricane is headed for the city where I live. Something is calling it. Part 1. 6 days before landfall. The howl of the storm was starting to make me nervous. It usually howls, especially at night, millions of voices screaming in the churning madness overhead, but not during the day. And not like this. I heard a disturbing purpose in the agony in the sky, the sound of insanity sharpened to a point. Long experience has taught me that when it sounds like that, I need to pay attention. I looked around, took in the jittery, off-kilter way that light and shadow leapt and flickered over the graffiti-pocked surfaces of the walls that lined the potholed street, so that the faded spray paint text seemed to twist and write itself anew. I tilted my face upward, towards the storm, and felt the way that it tugged at the green hijab that covered my long hair. Something was definitely coming. I could feel the monster inside of me stirring to meet it. A whimper, unearthly and echoing in the empty street, drew my attention from the sky. Not 20 feet from me, silhouetted in the mouth of an alley, I saw a small, thin, slouching figure, a little girl. Emaciated and doll-like, the sobbing child, with her head bowed and her thin, grimy hands covering her face, couldn't have been more than 10. The sounds of her distress, though not especially loud, filled the empty street, somehow audible, even at a distance. "Hey, you okay?" With one last, uneasy glance at the sky, I took a few cautious steps towards the alley. The girl took no notice of me. "My name is Layla. Will you come with me? It's not safe for you to be out here alone." The sound of my voice, a friendly voice, seemed to soothe the child's sobs. I still approached the girl with caution, however, she seemed like a skittish stray animal that might bolt at any moment. "Are your parents nearby?" I tried again. The girl neither replied, nor did she lift her head or back away. At a loss for what else to do, I reached out with a tentative hand. "Let me take you somewhere safe until we can find your parents. You can't stay." My voice died in my throat as I smoothed the girl's long, wild hair and realized, too late, that I shouldn't have been able to hear her cry, not over the sound of the storm. Not from so far away. I realized that I'd been lured into a trap. The child's hair was ice cold. The girl looked up at me, revealing wide eyes that had been totally consumed by the black, and a face coated not with grime but with a thick, sticky gore. She had been crying black spectral ichor. She drew desiccated lips back from yellow teeth like crooked razors and hissed. I stumbled back and jerked my hand away, but not fast enough, not before the girl grabbed my wrist with fingers like steel wires that bit into my flesh. Her jaw distended grotesquely as her mouth opened wide and became an impossibly black hole in her filthy face. She started to scream. In a smooth economy of motion, I did exactly as I'd been trained to do. I flexed my arm and bared the mottled gray sole steel of my wrist blade, and I sliced the specter's arm off, while at the same time, I put the wrist blade that slid from within my other arm through its open mouth and out the back of its head. The scream was drowned in a choking gurgle, and the specter lurched towards me, spewing me with a tarry spray of reeking ichor. I kicked it hard in the chest, and then took off running. Howling voices chased me, voices that wailed from alleys and the sky overheard like the otherworldly baying of ghostly hounds. The storm screeched out its mad rage, and shapes emerged from the clouds far overhead. I could tell before I got to the edge of the block that I wasn't going to make it back to the church. The specters came in a swarm, screaming out of the churning sky, 10, 15. More than I could count at a glance, their vast black shrouds billowing around them as they rode the wind, their mouths gaping and hungry, their eyes fevered, crazy, consumed by the black. They reached out as they sailed towards me on the back of the wind, and I saw the first pair of them stretch out long fingers as sharp as knives. I put my back to a wall, flexed my wrist blades, and got ready to fight. The first to get to me was more shroud than specter, when I slashed through its reaching black gossamer membranes, cutting them away before they could entangle and engulf me. I saw that most of the specter's flesh was ripped, slashed, and eaten away. Its entire lower half was gone, and its entrails streamed behind it like the tail of a perverse kite. 2 others from the mob fell on the creature like ravenous dogs sensing weakness the moment that my blade sliced free. It shrieked in an agony of frustrated rage as it was devoured. But another specter rushed in to take its place. I kicked it back, ducked clawing hands, and swung my wrist blades in sweeping arcs in a shotgun marriage of control and desperation. It wasn't about victory now, or even escape. I fought just for the next second, and then next, just to keep from being swarmed under. "In the name of the Lord thy God, I bid thee back. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, leave this place." White, blinding light sliced through the gloom. The specters screamed with pain as the light spread and bit deep into them. Their bodies boiled and smoked, and their great black shrouds trembled. With a wordless cry, desperation, elation, relief, and not a small amount of adrenaline, I launched myself at the mob. My soul steel blades caught and reflected that pure and purifying light. I seared the specters with borrowed holy fire, and then sliced through them while they writhed, helpless, in its glow. A few frantic moments was all that it took, and then, with an exhalation that was almost a sigh of defeat, the creatures withdrew, sucked back into the storm. Their mad gibbering faded until only the usual background wail remained. Sean? Alhamdulillah. From the sound of the howling, I thought ye could use some help. I threw myself into Sean's strong arms and let his familiar smell, whiskey mixed with sweat, wash over me. His low, rough voice and the music of his Irish accent soothed my rattled nerves. He clutched me in a possessive embrace, as though the storm might suck me away from him if he loosed his grip. "Don't be silly," I murmured against his chest. "I had them right where I wanted them." "Course you did." Sean kissed the top of my head. "Let's get home before they bring their friends for another go. Strange enough to see so many during the day, as it is." "Yeah, let's get out of here." I gave him one last squeeze before stepping out of his embrace, and together, we made our way through the broken streets back to St. Benedict's, the old church that we called home. Out from under the churning clouds overhead, and the monsters that should never have come for me like they did, not during the day. We'd have to figure out what was going on, but not right now. Right now, I just wanted to go home. 6 days before landfall. St. Benedict's is a small, old-fashioned church that has endured decades of neglect and decay by virtue of its outer walls having been built of heavy stone. It's an unusually solid structure, especially in Southern California, where everything seems to be built as cheaply as possible. Even the buildings in this part of the world are an extension of a culture geared towards throwing things away. But not St. Benedict's. Its large front doors are sturdy, aged oak, and makeshift shutters cover its broken stained glass windows, a barrier that Sean and I use to keep out the things that fly on the icy winds of the storm. It isn't, strictly speaking, really a church anymore. It was deconsecrated and abandoned years ago when, or so I've been told, most of the congregation having already fled the deteriorating neighborhood. The cost of earthquake retrofitting had proven too high for the few who remained. To Sean and I, however, it's still sacred ground. It's our sanctuary. After we climbed the handful of stairs and stepped inside, I turned my head and watched the silhouette of his giant frame lower the heavy bar across the door. It settled into its brackets with a hollow, reassuring thud. He squinted at me through the dim, filtered daylight that squeezed its way around the shutters and through small holes in the roof, and his weathered features creased into a smile. Sean is only in his 40s, but life has used him hard, and had left the scars of many sorrows on his face and body. One of his eyes is missing, just an angry knot of scar tissue that he doesn't bother to cover, but the other is a brilliant, clear, sparkling green that glows, luminous, with his powerful life force when he smiles. He has an uncertain smile, made crooked by the extensive scarring on his face, that trembles on his expressive mouth, as though after a lifetime of hardship, his face has all but forgotten how. Every time he smiles at me like that, I can feel a tug on my heart, as though a string that runs from my soul to his is being pulled tight. Careless of the mess of black ichor that spattered my clothes, I wrapped my arms around him and drew him in close. "Love, ye smell like shit. And I'm getting it all over you." Sean laughed and cocooned me in his powerful embrace. He held me close enough that his heavy duster settled around me. "What happened out there?" he asked after a moment. I burrowed my face into his chest and breathed in the masculine musk of his sweat. I didn't answer right away. "Love? I don't know." My voice sounded flat in my ears. My mind shied away from the image of the little girl in the moment when she'd raised her head. In the moment when I'd seen that she wasn't actually a girl at all. Not anymore. I guess I let my guard down. "I don't blame ye for that," he soothed. "It's rare enough to see one of them when the sun's up, much less numbers like that." The first one, the one that called the others, it looked like a little girl. Just like a little girl. Sean didn't expect any kind of an explanation from me for what happened, for my lapse in judgment, but I felt compelled to try and find an explanation, anyway. It couldn't have been a specter for long, to have still looked so human. His grip on me tightened. "Let's go get ye cleaned up." Just a little girl. I can't imagine. Except I could imagine, and that, I realized, was the thing that bothered me so much, the profound unfairness that I needed to explain not to Sean, but to myself. A few weeks ago, It couldn't have been much more than that. The screeching thing that I'd carved to pieces had been a living, innocent soul with a lifetime of possibilities before her, and all of it had been taken from her because she had wandered into a specter's grasp. I knew exactly what would have happened to the child next, because it had happened to me. I remembered the panic and the confusion that I had felt, enveloped so tight in the specter's shrouds that I had to fight for every breath, watching the familiar streets of Tehran dropping away beneath me. A bone-chilling cold, first from the specter's touch and then from the thinning air, banished even the memory of warmth from my heart. I remembered the storm looming above me, and the chorus of pure madness that rose to a crescendo as I was carried closer. Greedy. Expectant. Hungry. The girl would have passed out well before I had, but that wouldn't have been the end of her suffering. She would have awoken to the same pure agony that had ripped me back to consciousness, the agony of 1,000 ravenous things staring into her body, devouring her whole. She would have felt icy teeth strip chunks of her flesh from the bone, and claws like razor blades flay her skin and take it off in long strips, all while the shriek of the storm drove from her mind the last scraps of human reason. And then, when everything that had made her human had been stripped away from her and consumed, the black would have been waiting. "Layla? Check my eyes. Please." Sean sighed and put 2 fingers under my chin. I had to fight the urge to look away when he lifted my head and his green eye pierced mine, and I knew that wasn't a good sign. Neither was the weariness that settled over his expression. "I'll read to you later. The only thing that sets me apart from the Spectre girl is a reserve of strength, a sense of self that could never have been expected in a child. When the black had slithered into me through every open wound and tried to devour my soul the way that its specters have consumed my flesh, I've been able to resist, to hold on to a small part of myself. To keep something for myself, something that it couldn't make me surrender. Instead of becoming a spectre riding the icy winds of the storm, I had fallen to the earth as returned, no longer human, but not yet a spectre. Not yet. The black is still there inside me. I can feel its whispering presence in the darkest, ugliest parts of my psyche in the quiet moments when there's nothing I can use to distract myself. The black is still there, always there, like the world's worst house guest, and the black is patient. Few stay return for long, the black always takes its due in the end. But then again, few returned have someone like Sean in their corner. "I've been working on my Arabic," he told me while he guided me past the broken pews that the 2 of us have been making a project of restoring. "I'll show ye, if ye promise not to laugh this time." I chuckled under my breath at the memory of his first stab at Arabic, while he opened the trapdoor behind the dais. He's been learning the language from a Libyan couple who run a bodega a couple of streets over, and he was so proud, that first time, to show me his progress. But the Irish accent that makes such music of his English is entirely the wrong cadence for Arabic, and had made every word he so earnestly recited criminally mispronounced and hilariously unintelligible. "I'll try to keep a straight face. You're not off to a very good start." With the trapdoor to the basement open, we descended into the dark below. I let down my hair while Sean, his way lit by a keychain flashlight, went around the room turning on battery-powered LED lamps. Gradually, the cool glow of the lights illuminated the myriad of hand tools and weapons that hang from pegs on the walls, the heavy wooden work table that still bears some of the decorative carvings that betrays its past life as a pew, the rickety bed with its paper-thin mattress, the listing IKEA cast-off that holds our books and other meager belongings, and the pile of heavy rope in the corner. By the time he had the lights turned on, I was already walking towards the rope. "Why don't we get ye cleaned up first?" I glanced over my shoulder at Sean. He watched me with the wounded, slack expression that he only lets himself show down here, when he and I are alone. Like my hair, currently hanging around my shoulders and brushing my waist, his pain is something private, something only for me. Let's just get it over with. The look of hurt and resignation that lined his face broke my heart. It's so much harder for him, what he has to do. Even so, he took the ropes from me and bound my hands and feet. His resolution only faltered when it came time to tighten the bonds. Tighter than that. It had to be tight. Things would go bad, very bad, if I got free. At the time, I didn't really understand what might happen, but I knew how dangerous I could be. Now, of course. Now I know exactly what I would have done if given the chance. I saw the muscles around his jaw tense when he gritted his teeth and forced himself to pull the ropes tighter. They dug into my wrists and ankles, but I turned my head to hide the involuntary wince of pain. He knew that he was hurting me, but that didn't mean that I was going to throw it in his face while I could still spare him. When I turned my head back, I found him walking back from the bookshelf, holding my worn, treasured copy of the Holy Quran. "You're seriously going to take a crack at Arabic?" I've been working on it, haven't I? He gave me a weak smile that didn't touch his weary green eye. I don't hear most of what you read. You don't have to. I know. Sean took off his heavy iron cross and held it in one weathered hand, with the book in the other. He started to read. His accent hadn't gotten any better. The words he read were so garbled that if I hadn't already known them by heart, I wouldn't have been able to understand him at all. But I found comfort in his deep voice, made rough by the life that he'd lived, all the same. Even though I knew what was coming, there was something warm and relaxing about listening to him struggle through the unfamiliar language. This old dog had worked so hard to learn a new trick, just so that he could read to me from my cherished holy book, rather than his. Then the pain began. It started as a dull throb deep inside of me, a mounting pressure like something more desperate and more primal than a rising scream. The darkness ached inside of me. It clung to what remained of my soul, scrabbling for purchase, trying to resist Sean's call for it to rip out of my flesh and rejoin the storm. I clenched my fists and, even though I knew it was useless, tried to keep control. This time, I wouldn't let myself scream. This time. The throbbing pressure exploded inside of me and filled my insides with fire. I shuddered and writhed on the ground, even as every movement sent a new hot dagger through my body, a body that had become nothing but pain. The darkness ripped me away piece by piece. It flayed me from the inside with the violence of its rise. I started to scream. I first became aware, as I awoke, of a sleepy numbness. I let out a soft sigh and stretched out on the bed. I felt hollowed out, my whole body weighed down by a deep weariness. More than anything else, I wanted to rest. Just rest. I pulled the blanket to my chin. When, a moment later, the memory of why I was in bed, feeling so lazy and relaxed, came trickling back, I opened my eyes again. I blinked the room into focus. The cool light of the LED lamp still lit the room, and as I turned my head to look around, I saw that light wink off of a bottle of whiskey with only a little bit of the amber liquid left inside, and next to it, on the floor beside the bed, I saw the huddled, broken figure that was Sean. He'd left his heavy duster and his worn boots in a pile on the floor, but he still wore his threadbare shirt and the ripped trousers that were more duct tape than pants. I could smell the whiskey on his breath, even from where I was. I rolled onto my side, scooted to the edge of the bed, and reached out to him. I combed my fingers through the mixed russet and gray of his hair. "Thank you," I whispered. He didn't lift his head from his hands. "I'm so sorry, love." A slight slurring of his speech hinted at how drunk he was. Sean had to be pretty far gone before he started to slur like that. "You're the one who's still in pain. Not me." I tried to draw him out of his collapsed state with my voice and the touch of my cool fingertips. "I wish you didn't have to." He finally lifted his head and turned to look at me. I read in the moisture that still glistened on his cheek and the redness around his eye that he'd been crying. I caressed his cheek, traced, with my thumb, the long scar that ran from his missing eye to his jaw. He laid his hand over mine, trapped it in place with his gentle touch, and closed his eye. "Come to bed, love." Sean nodded, and let my hand go. I sat up slowly, as tranquil and refreshed as I might have felt inside. My body ached from the ordeal it had just been through. As the covers fell away, I discovered that Sean had already stripped away my ichor-spattered clothing. Sean stumbled as he tried to rise, and wound up sitting down hard on the bed with a handful of mumbled curses, but I soothed him with a touch to his arm. He let me undress him, exposing, as I lifted his shirt and worked his pants free, a lean, muscled body covered with the many, many scars that are the souvenirs of his violent life. Once I had left his shirt and pants on the floor with his boots and jacket, I opened my arms to welcome him. He sagged into my embrace, but not before I felt a shiver run through his body. I started to pull away. "Am I too cold?" "I'm too drunk to feel the cold." He pulled me close. "Come here." I buried myself in his arms, with my cheek pressed against his chest, felt a thrum of tension in his powerful body, and knew he was forcing himself not to shiver. The truth is that I'm cold, as cold as the storm, the kind of cold that runs bone deep. Only Sean, warmed by an inferno of faith and purpose, could ever have held me like this. He clutched at me, and I felt his rough hand stroking the skin of my back. "I'm sorry," he mumbled again. I wanted to tell him again that he had nothing to be sorry for, but I knew from experience that he was too drunk to try to reason with, so I, reluctantly, limited myself to soothing noises. As I lay in his arms, with my cheek pressed against his chest, surrounded by the scent of whiskey and the scent of him, my eyes filled with ice-cold tears. Sean had endured a life of pain, and not just the kind that stemmed from the abuse he'd put his body through. It was, and is, an open wound, The knowledge that I add to that pain. The black pollutes everything that it touches. Everything. Even our love for each other.